scope, getting imprisoned by, there were 200 years of religious wars in Europe, and out of all that, people started turning to more secular views and the importance of knowledge, and they started reaching back to the classics of Greece and Rome and the philosophers of that period to really build a new knowledge. It was coming to a level of confidence that we can solve our own problems, that the world is explainable, is mathematical, predictable, and that maybe God doesn't play the part that we once thought it did.
Well, it sounds like nature's God, just what you explained.
It is nature's God, yes. That was the phrase they used.
And when they started amending the Constitution, they put the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment. Now, I was thinking,
there's a reason why it was the first one.
Why didn't they put it in the 6th or 7th? Why do you think they made it the first one? I don't think a lot of religious people that don't believe in church and state separation realize that this was an actual message to everyone who is going to read this in the future.
It was very key. It was very key. The First Amendment actually gives us 3 freedoms: press, assembly, and religion. Promises that the government will stay out of these things. And this was very controversial at the time. There were preachers and priests screaming that this republic isn't going to last 10 years unless we promise God or give credit to God for what we've had. And Madison, you have to give him credit, as the first Speaker of the House, he was the one that drafted and got through Congress the Bill of Rights. And he was the one that made sure that the freedom of religion was included in the First Amendment.
I cannot believe how courageous these people were facing a Christian nation at that particular time. A majority of Christians, I should say. It wasn't a Christian nation, but a majority of Christians and very powerful religious leaders coming to them and saying, you must put God into the Constitution. But there is not one mention of Jesus, Christianity, or God in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights.
Well, there is a mention of religious test of office in the Constitution, basically a negative reference saying we cannot, any religious test for office is prohibited in our Constitution, which of course today you basically have a religious test now in play. You see the candidates and their election campaigns going on.
That's right.
And that's all they talk about is their faith and making sure that that they have a relationship with Jesus Christ.
No atheist will ever be elected to office.
Well, I think it was a lot more likely to have happened in the 19th century than the 20th or 21st. In fact, you probably don't know this, but California had an avowed atheist governor. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Yes. Colbert Olson was a governor of California in the 1940s. And you know how we're so used to seeing elected officials take their oath of office on a Bible and say, "So help me God."
What did he do?
He refused the Bible. He did not say, "So help me God." He gave his affirmation over a copy of the Constitution.
Oh, how appropriate. And did you know that, I don't know if you know this, you probably do, being an advocate of atheism, that in 14 states, you cannot hold public office without defining that you believe in an almighty. It can be Muhammad, it can be, Jehovah, it could be,
as long as you believe in something supernatural out there.
That's right.
But if you don't believe in anything, you can't.
And isn't that against the first?
Absolutely, it's
which amendment is it? Not the First Amendment, but it's another amendment where a test of religion cannot be made for any seat in government office. Isn't that another amendment?
It's not an amendment at all. It's Article 6 of the Constitution.
Article 6, so it's part. See, this is how much
embedded in it. Yeah, major part of it.
Also, that as an atheist, I cannot actually testify in a court of law in 7 states if I do not put my hand on the Bible.
And that was very much the case before the Civil War, because the federal government was very separate from the state government. The federal constitution was separate from the state constitutions. And there was even an establishment of religion in most of the states and colonies when we became in a country. And they continued.
So they held over that belief system?
For decades, yeah. It wasn't until the Civil War and the 14th Amendment got passed that said all the rights embedded in the federal constitution must be recognized by the states. And then all those clauses, which are still in those state constitutions, they're just unenforceable at this point.
In fact, all the 50 states have the word Almighty or God or Creator in their constitution.
Thanking the Creator for.
And that's fine, because the Constitution does that too.
What was the history of the world?
That's right. It's acknowledging a Creator but defining on what type of creator that is fairly ambiguous. It's left up to the interpretation of anybody who wants to believe, oh, they were talking about my particular God, right?
Of course, of course.
Of course. Now let's jump ahead a little bit, because I'm glad that you have a lot of history. In fact, I'm learning something from you, which is odd for me because I'm usually teaching people on this particular subject.
See, okay.
And let's jump ahead to 1963. Oh, but before that, how about 1955, when the Knights of Columbus came to Congress and said, let's make ourselves separate from those atheist communists. We have to put "In God We Trust" on our money. The new national motto, actually changing the motto from "E Pluribus Unum," which is, I'm sorry, did I mispronounce that?
E Pluribus Unum, you were right.
Yeah. And that is from many, one, which represents from many different peoples, one nation. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And
isn't that beautiful? I love that. You know,
it's beautiful. It's heartwarming. You know, I wish it was still there. Now it's "In God We Trust."
Now it's "In God We
And
Trust."
why do you think they did this? Now, I have two reasons myself, but I want to hear your opinion.
Well, I understand it was the height of the McCarthy era. The Soviet menace had arisen in 1917, and now we were facing, had just finished World War II, and the Cold War was starting up. So there was an argument being made that we have to, and if you're familiar with any sort of war propaganda, it's always you dehumanize the other side. So one of the steps that was done at that time, one of the arguments was, if we define ourselves as the godly people, and the other side is the godless, well, that puts God on our side.
Stalin was an atheist, wasn't he?
Stalin was an atheist.
But he killed atheists as well as all the other people that were in power at that time, including the religious clergy.
As far as I know, he never asked what persons, whether they were atheists or not, before he did whatever he did.
That's right. And also with Pol Pot, it's all a political maneuver from an atheist standpoint. In fact, a lot of people say that Hitler, talking about the 1945-55 era that we are, a lot of people think that Hitler was an atheist. Was he an atheist?
That a lot. No, absolutely not. He was a good Catholic boy. He was never excommunicated from the Catholic Church, and all his soldiers had a little belt buckle that said,
God is with us.
God is with us. That's right.
And that's
so he was very devout.
Yes, very well. So that kind of sweeps away the entire notion, the myth that Hitler was an atheist, right?
Well, yeah, and I find the whole idea of because you're religious or because you're an atheist and you've somehow been involved in the murder of all these people, that somehow either validates or invalidates atheism or religion. I mean, that's just a silly red herring that really no one should be taking seriously on. It's a much deeper philosophical worldview that you're talking about, to simplify it in so simple terms.
So the basic motto that was changed in 1955, it was all, "In God We Trust," by the way, was on some coins during the Civil War and in the early 1900s. First time it was on the bills, 1957. Is that correct?
And of course, you understand, since the founding of our republic, there were calls from the religious community every year to have some sort of divine recognition, to have some sort of God recognition going on. And, you know, it's been an erosion of that wall of separation ever since. So eventually we had chaplains that were originally volunteers. Now they're paid something like close to $200,000 a year.
And that's our money.
That's tax money.
Going to a chapel.
And that's the House and the Senate have their own chaplains with their own staff who have amazing access to our congressmen that you and I certainly don't have. And it's gone on since then. It's just continued.
Well, let's take a look at this a little bit more personal, because the Christian would say, let's go for those chaplains anyway. I don't care. I'll throw my tax money into it. I think that's a little short-sighted, because they're actually cutting their own throat. The reason religion in this particular country is so powerful and growing is because we have a separation of church and state. In other countries, when they have the church related to the state, for instance, Iran, you have an exact amount of mosques that are never going to be built because the government is part of that religion, and they will actually control that religion. So you can't grow if the government doesn't want you to grow.
And I'm sure you know about the lesson that we can learn from Europe. There is established churches in every country in Europe. And Europe is probably the highest number of atheists and the lowest number of people attending church in the world.
That's right. And they do not have church-state separation in Europe. Is that correct?